Welcome everybody. This is the first class in a seminar about the secret doctrine and its main concepts. The secret doctrine was written by Madame Blavatsky 125 years ago. This is regarded by many as one of the main books, if not the main one, written by the founder of the Theosophical Society. This book is written in 2 volumes. The first volume deals with the cosmogenesis, that is, the creation or the evolution of the universe, not only from a physical point of view, but also from a spiritual point of view. The second volume deals with anthropogenesis, that is, the evolution of human beings, again, from a physical, but more importantly, from a spiritual point of view. And then most of the editions bring a third volume, which is just the index where you can find the different subjects that the secret doctrine deals with. The secret doctrine is based, according to Blavatsky, on a secret book that is a book that is not known outside the circle of the adepts, her teachers. And this book is known as the Book of Xian. The Book of Xian is said to be part of the books of QT. David Regal made some researches trying to find out what these books of QT were, and he found out that they are part of the Tibetan Buddhist Tantras. Now Blavatsky says that the books of QT that she's talking about are 7 volumes which are secret, which are not available to the public. And she says that there are many other volumes which are a more or less veiled form of these secret volumes that the adepts have. So the Book of Xian is part or a commentary to these books of QT. Now the Book of Xian is written in a language which is not known. It is called Zenzar. This language, which is used by the adepts, seems to be a pictorial language, that is, a language made of symbols. Now there are some translations of the contents of the Book of Xian in different languages, in Tibetan, in Sanskrit, in Chinese. All these translations, of course, are in the possession of the adepts. So what Blavatsky did was to translate partially this Book of Xian and to give some of the stanzas that are in this book for the first time in a European language. She says in one of the commentaries on the secret doctrine that were published that the Book of Xian has many stanzas. I think she says like 60 stanzas were left aside or were not published. And Blavatsky only published a few stanzas. In volume 1 we have 7 stanzas, in volume 2 we have 12 stanzas. So what Blavatsky is presenting here is just a partial exposition of what the esoteric philosophy is. And she says that in repeated places. She says we only lifted the tip of a veil, and we are not giving the whole of the esoteric philosophy. As we are going to see, there are several reasons for this to be like that. Now, these volumes of the secret doctrine are organized in a particular way. This organization probably does not belong to Blavatsky. When she was writing the secret doctrine, she didn't really write it with a system. And she had a group of students around in England, and they helped to frame the secret doctrine in a more systematic way. So 2 main people that worked on this were the Kightleys, which, as I said, were living in London. And these students proposed to organize the secret doctrine in 3 main parts. And they say, according to their testimony, they said that wherever there were gaps, they would go to Blavatsky and say, you didn't write about this or about that, can you write some more so that we can add it to the secret doctrine? So it seems that the organization was a collective work, but of course all the information came from Madame Blavatsky and possibly from her teachers. So to give you a general idea of the organization of these volumes, let me show you the different parts that it has. We have the volume 1 and the volume 2. As I said, the volume 1 deals with the cosmogenesis. That means the creation of the cosmos, the universe. And volume 2 with the anthropogenesis. Anthropo means human being. So these volumes, they have one part that is called part 1, where Blavatsky translated some of the stanzas of Cyan. Then there is a second part where Madame Blavatsky deals with the symbolism. And there is a third part where Madame Blavatsky deals with the science of the time. And there is a comparison between the science of the time and the science that is in the secret doctrine. There is also an introduction and a conclusion to each volume. The introduction is called in the first volume the proem, and it's very famous among students, and we are going to see why. And the introduction for the second volume is called preliminary notes. And there is also a conclusion in each of the volumes. We are going to see later on some quotes where Blavatsky recommends to begin by reading these parts. But let me say now that these volumes that follow more or less the same pattern are connected between them in the sense that they show the counterparts of the cosmos and the human being. Again, we are going to see that this correlation between cosmos and human beings is an aspect that is very important to keep in mind. Because as we are going to explore during this seminar, it is by applying the teachings that are related to the cosmos to the human being that we can use the secret doctrine as a spiritual practice. Now, the aims of the secret doctrine were several. It is not a book that was written only to help the individual seeker of truth. The secret doctrine sought to create a change, a revolution in the thoughts, in the culture of the 19th century. And to a large extent it did. One of the aims, the subtitle of the secret doctrine, if you go to the first page, it says, "The synthesis of science, religion, and philosophy." So we have the secret doctrine, which is presented as a synthesis of these three avenues of knowledge that humanity has developed: the scientific approach, the philosophical approach, and the religious approach. And the aims of this book are related to these three avenues of knowledge. One of the aims of Blavatsky while writing the secret doctrine was to present what she called the esoteric philosophy. That means a philosophical view of human beings and the cosmos, which is based on the esoteric knowledge that the adepts possess. The word esoteric means inner or hidden or not too apparent, as opposed to exoteric, which is the external or the obvious meaning of something. As we are going to see, the Secret Doctrine was produced, or the knowledge that is published in the Secret Doctrine was acquired in a scientific way, but again, not as we understand science at the moment. So let us go back to the esoteric philosophy. The esoteric philosophy is a view of the universe in which the human being and the cosmos are explained not only in terms of the physical aspect, not only in terms of the mental or intellectual aspect, but also in terms of a spiritual aspect. When we talk about philosophy, we usually think of a set of ideas, a body of ideas that were developed by a person, a philosopher, who by intellectual efforts is trying to find out, to guess to a certain extent, the explanation for different problems in human knowledge. Why we are here, what's the nature of God, what is good, what is evil. But in what we understand as philosophy, in the Western approach, the modern Western approach to philosophy, it is basically the outcome of the powers of reasoning of a person. Now, the esoteric philosophy is not like that. Blavatsky didn't write down something that is the outcome of her ingenuity, her reasoning on certain problems of human knowledge or existence. She claims that this esoteric philosophy comes from people who can actually have a direct perception of all these topics, and partly also from her own experience and her own direct knowledge. So the esoteric philosophy, as we are going to see, we will explore the main tenets of this esoteric philosophy, was presented for the first time in modern times in the West in the book that A.P. Sinnett wrote, which is called Esoteric Buddhism. A.P. Sinnett was in touch with two of these adepts or Mahatmas, as they are known, which got involved in a correspondence with Sinnett and with another Englishman. They were both English, Hume. They were living in India, and through Madame Blavatsky and some other disciples, they began to receive some letters from the Mahatmas. Now, this knowledge that was collected little by little through the letters was published by Mr. Sinnett in the book The Esoteric Buddhism. And it was the first attempt to present a systematic approach to or exposition of part of the esoteric philosophy. The book was successful to a large extent, although it was fragmentary and it had some errors or some mistakes. So a few years later, the Mahatmas asked Madame Blavatsky to write this book, The Secret Doctrine, to present a wider exposition of the esoteric philosophy. So through the Secret Doctrine, Madame Blavatsky presented many subjects that the esoteric philosophy postulates, which were in print for the first time in the West in a public sense, in a public way. Because previously there were many traditions that had parts of this knowledge, but they were taught and they were studied in a secluded way, with secret societies, with small groups. But now, for the first time, at least in modern times, we have a publication of a wide range of topics as seen by the esoteric philosophy. So this was one of the the aims of Madame Blavatsky while writing The Secret Doctrine. It tried to show that there is a different view of human beings, which is neither the Christian view of the time, nor the scientific view of the time, nor the spiritualistic view. None of these approaches were complete enough from the point of view of Madame Blavatsky. The Secret Doctrine produced a great impact in the world, especially in the world of esotericism. Most of the occultists that came out of at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, they were members of the Theosophical Society, like Max Heindel, who founded the Rosicrucian movement, or Pappus, who was into Kabbalah and some more practical magic schools like the Golden Dawn. He wasn't involved with the Golden Dawn in particular, but that kind of organizations. Then we have Steiner, that was also a member of the Theosophical Society, or Alice Bailey, or many others. So many people that founded movements, esoteric movements, at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, they were influenced by the Secret Doctrine. And in their writings, they recognize this. They talk about the Secret Doctrine. So the Secret Doctrine really produced an impact in the world of esotericism. And even today is read and discussed by many people, both within and outside the Theosophical Society or the Theosophical movement. Even scientists and artists and people from different movements have read the Secret Doctrine. Now, another aim of this book was to show that there was something like an ancient wisdom religion. You know, the concept of religion in the West, especially at the time, was that there is a God, there is one true God, and that God gave a revelation. So anything that it doesn't belong to that tradition is wrong, because it didn't come from God. Now, the Secret Doctrine is postulating that there was an ancient wisdom religion, ancient meaning far before Christianity, far before the Jewish, if we look at the Judeo-Christian tradition, and that this religion that was there, Blavatsky said, is actually the foundation for all the different religions that sprang during the time in different cultures at different ages. So she was postulating that there is this common source of religious knowledge in which every spiritual teacher had access to. This was an idea that, of course, was revolutionary at the time, although it had been proposed in the past. For example, Ficino's Prisca Theologia, he said there were pretty much the same. There is a common source of religious knowledge, which is there behind every spiritual movement. But at the time, in the 19th century, this had been completely forgotten. And even today, not everybody accepts this, of course. After Blavatsky's and the Theosophical Society's work and publication, this idea of an ancient wisdom religion has become much more accepted. Even in philosophy, we have some schools where they talk about this perennial philosophy, where they postulate that there is indeed a common source of wisdom for all the cultures in the world. So the idea was accepted to some extent, although most religions still are trying to keep their exclusivism. They feel that if they accept that there was a common wisdom, then why would a person belong to one particular religion and not to the other? So in Buddhism, they tend to have a more open view in the sense of, well, a person is attracted to a particular religion according to his previous karma. And there are some religions that are more suited to a person than the other. But in most religions, this is still a very difficult point, and to accept that all religions come from a common source. However, the Secret Doctrine and other theosophical writings did produce a change in the thinking of the time. And there were, as I said, some schools of thoughts that began to develop these concepts and that are still today active. So first, one of the aims we said was the esoteric philosophy, to present an esoteric view of the world, the universe, human beings, the deity. The second is to present this idea of a common wisdom tradition, wisdom religion. And another aim of the Secret Doctrine was to present the idea that there is an occult science. You know, at the time in the 19th century, some of the scientists were saying that in a few decades, science was going to be able to explain everything in terms of the mechanistic view of the universe. Of course, at the time, there was nothing like relativity or quantum physics or anything like that. There was a mechanistic view of the universe. The universe is just like a big clock, and this machine runs smoothly, automatically, mechanically, and therefore there is no need for any religion, any God. This is just a machine. There is no need of somebody or some intelligence guiding anything. So this approach was influencing people who were there at the end of the 19th century with an intellectual eagerness, where they had left the religion because religion couldn't answer the questions that they had, and the only answers they were finding was in science. So many of them had become atheists. Just like Annie Besant. Annie Besant, before joining the Theosophical Society, had become a materialistic or, positivist, as it is called that in philosophy, the idea that only what can be proved through our senses is true. And this was because there was a lack of a spiritual approach that would satisfy the intellectual eagerness, the intellectual questions. So Madame Blavatsky sought to show that there is a deeper science. This deeper science is what she called the occult science. That this deeper science knows more than the modern science, that the normal science about the world. And with that, she tried to show, to people at least, that the scientists who were proclaiming to know everything were not all-knowing. So, as we can see in her writings, in the Secret Doctrine and in some other writings, she spends some time refuting some of the current scientific views of the time. So, for example, she said that the atom was divisible when science thought the atom was just a solid ball with no divisions, no motion. So Blavatsky said, no, that's not what it is. The atom is constantly, you can divide it constantly, and it is full of energy and vitality. She even used the word atomic energy. There is an energy there that science didn't know anything about. So with the Secret Doctrine, Blavatsky showed how it is possible to approach spirituality in a scientific way and how it is possible to expand the boundaries of science beyond the physical realm so that it can embrace non-physical planes of the universe. Of course, to be able to become an occult scientist, we need to tread the path of the occult path, or the path of spirituality that Blavatsky was laying down in her writings, and other theosophists also, which is not as easy to do as becoming a scientist. But at any rate, she tried to show that there is the possibility of a deeper science. And the Secret Doctrine was, I think, the first attempt in modern times to bring together science and spirituality, a field that today is growing steadily and that is attracting more and more scientists. So as we can see, the Secret Doctrine tried to show a different view of philosophy, of religion, and of science, and tried to open the eyes of the Western world to an approach that was unknown at the time. And it did produce several changes. You know, as I have said, there is a view in certain groups of within philosophy, the philosophical academia, there is a view where now they accept that there is a common source of knowledge or wisdom. There is an effort in bringing science and spirituality together, and there is an explosion, if we want to put it that way, of interest about the esoteric, which is not always deep, sometimes it's superficial, but the main esoteric ideas are much more spread than they were 125 years ago. So this is the aspect of the Secret Doctrine that have to do with a change in the culture. When you read the Secret Doctrine, you will find many references to philosophers of the time, or psychologists, or scientists, to ideas that were held at the end of the 19th century and that now are not current anymore. And so part of the Secret Doctrine is dated because it was aimed at the people of the time. Now, there is an aspect of the Secret Doctrine which is perennial, which is everlasting. It doesn't matter when the Secret Doctrine was written, this aspect is still useful and will still be useful for many years in the future. So in this seminar, we are going to focus more on this aspect, the perennial aspect of the Secret Doctrine, which has to do with the esoteric philosophy and with some concepts of the occult science and the wisdom religion. Now, the fact that the Secret Doctrine was produced with so many aims in view makes the study especially difficult. When a person tries to study the Secret Doctrine, the first thing that he or she encounters is that the text seems daunting. It's very difficult to approach. He or she first encounters many words in different languages, Sanskrit, Chinese, Greek, Hebrew, Tibetan, in many languages, because Blavatsky is comparing different traditions, philosophies, is trying to explain things for which our modern languages don't have any words. So necessarily, she has to use a lot of foreign languages. The person also finds many references to many books, books that are well known today or books that are not known at all, because Blavatsky was trying to prove these teachings existed since the beginning of the human development, and you can find it in this ancient book and in this modern philosopher. So the fact that Blavatsky was trying to do so many things, as I said, makes the study of the secret doctrine difficult. But also the esoteric philosophy itself is difficult to understand because it's talking about things, and we are going to deal with this more in depth later. It's talking about things that are beyond the perception of our intellectual mind. Our mind, our language is developed to describe and to relate to the physical world, to the physical and emotional and intellectual relationships we have with people, objects, situations. But the esoteric philosophy talks about higher realms for which we naturally don't have words. So whoever tries to convey something that belongs to these higher realms have to use words that are inappropriate. Some languages are said to have been developed with the spiritual realms in view, so that these languages, like the Sanskrit, for example, can explain a little better than the modern languages certain aspects of the spiritual worlds. So, for this reason, Madame Blavatsky uses many of the Tibetan or Sanskrit words in her work. Now, this seems to be a problem or a hindrance, but it's actually, as we are going to see, it's actually the very heart of the secret doctrine. This difficulty in studying the secret doctrine is its very heart, because a secret doctrine is not trying to convey a knowledge. Of course it conveys knowledge, but that's not the primary aim. The primary aim, as we are going to see, is that of awakening the spiritual intuition in the student, not filling his or her head with concepts. If that were the aim, then the secret doctrine is one more philosophy among many. But that is not the primary aim. So Madame Blavatsky wrote that a work which compares several dozens of philosophies and over half a dozen of world religions, a work which has to unveil the roots with the greatest precautions, as it can only hint at the secret blossoms here and there, cannot be comprehended at a first reading, nor even after several, unless the reader elaborates for himself a system for it. So this is the first, when trying to see how to study the secret doctrine, this is the first thing we have to keep in mind. It's not a book that can be read and understood in our first reading, or even in several readings. This is a book to work with, or to work on. We have to, as we study, we have to develop our own system. You will see in many places there are what seems to be contradictions. And when most of the times where there is a contradiction, it is because our understanding is narrow or limited. If we keep working on that, we eventually come up to a view where the two apparent contradictions align and they become comprehensible. So they become, we can understand how the two statements are true. So we are going to explore that more, but at this point, it is important to keep in mind, don't go to the secret doctrine thinking that you are going to read a textbook on the esoteric philosophy or on anything else. Actually, Blavatsky said also, reading the secret doctrine page by page, as one reads any other book, will only end in confusion. So this is the main problem that most students have. They buy the book, it looks like a thick but regular book. They start reading from page 1 and they go on, and they find that they don't get a clear idea of almost anything. If anything, they begin to get more confusion. So that's not the way to study. Of course, you can read the secret doctrine from cover to cover. That's perfectly fine. But it requires much more than just reading the pages. When asked, Madame Blavatsky said she proposed a way to study this. She said, the first thing to do, even if it takes years, is to get some grasp of the three fundamental principles given in the proem. As I told you, the books are organized in three parts. The first part deals with the stanzas, the second part deals with symbolism of the different religions and traditions, and the third part deals with this comparison between science and the occult science in subjects that pertain to the cosmogenesis or the anthropogenesis according to the volume. Now, she also adds like an introduction, which in the first volume is called proem, and she also adds a conclusion. Which in the first volume is called summing up, or we are going to see. So Blavatsky says the first thing we have to do, even if it takes years, is to get some grasp of the three fundamental propositions. And that's basically what we are going to do during this seminar, although we are going to incorporate also concepts from other parts of the secret doctrine. So she continues to say, follow up by the study of the recapitulation, the numbered items in the summing up of volume 1. So this conclusion actually, Blavatsky is the conclusion after the part 1. You will see it after the stanzas of Xian. And it's called summing up. Within this part, you will see different subtitles. The whole summing up is interesting. She says in particular the recapitulation. So then she goes on to say, goes to the second volume, and she says, then take the preliminary notes. That's the intro aspect. It's called in the second volume preliminary notes. Which is the intro that is there. And then she says, and the conclusion of the volume 2. So we have, it is called conclusion. So those are the 4 parts that Madame Blavatsky recommends. To study the first volume, read the proem, and then the summing up. Then to study the second volume, read the preliminary notes, then the conclusion. And then you can start reading the stanzas, the symbolism, and the science. As I said, we are going to deal especially with the proem, which sets up the main ideas for the first volume of the Secret Doctrine, the volume that deals with the generation, the evolution, or emanation of the universe. Then, when talking to students of the Secret Doctrine, she recommended 4 main ideas or concepts that the student has to keep in the back of his or her mind constantly while studying the Secret Doctrine. So she said, no matter what one may study in the Secret Doctrine, let the mind hold fast as the basis of its ideation to the following ideas. A. The fundamental unity of all existence. Fundamentally, there is one being. Being absolute, there is nothing outside it. It is indivisible, else it would not be absolute. So the first point we have to keep in mind is that in spite of all the diversity that we are going to explore while reading or studying the Secret Doctrine, all this diversity is just different aspects of the one being. There is only one being in the universe, and there is not really separation. So Madame Blavatsky goes on to say, the atom, the man, the God, are each separately, as well as all collectively, absolute being in their last analysis. That is their real individuality. So every being in the universe is just an expression of the one absolute being. And she says, it is this idea which must be held always in the background of the mind, to form the basis for every conception that arises from the study of the Secret Doctrine. The moment one lets it go, and it is most easy to do so when engaged in any of the many intricate aspects of the esoteric philosophy, the idea of separation supervenes, and the study loses its value. See how emphatic she is in regards to this first idea, because she says the moment one lets this idea go and gets lost in all the intricate aspects of the esoteric philosophy, and we begin to think that these beings are all separate and different, then the study loses its value. The second idea that Madame Blavatsky recommends to keep in mind while studying the Secret Doctrine is the following. You must hold fast that there is no dead matter. Every last atom is alive. It cannot be otherwise, since every atom is itself fundamentally absolute being. This is a derivation from the first idea that says everything in the universe is one being. So if everything in the universe is this one being, then there is nothing that is can be devoid of consciousness or of matter, for that matter. So there is only one being, and therefore everything in the universe has consciousness and has matter. So she goes on saying, there is no such thing as spaces of ether or akasha, or call it what you like, in which angels and elementals disport themselves like trout in water. So that means there is not empty space with nothing there. Sometimes we feel, between this and the audience, there is empty space. She says, no, there is a continuity of consciousness everywhere. The whole universe is filled with consciousness. There is nothing that is devoid of matter and consciousness. So the very space that we see around is full with consciousness and substance of different types. And this is very important, as we are going to see in the future. So she says the true idea shows every atom of substance, no matter of what plane to be in, itself alive. So this that we think is inanimate, as opposed to our body, for example, well, everything has a kind of consciousness and life. Of course, not the same manifestation, the same degree of manifestation in a body or in a chair. But still, there is some aspect of life everywhere, and some aspect of matter also everywhere, even in the very highest spiritual planes. So then she says, the third basic idea to be held is that man, and by that she means a human being, is the microcosm. And he is so, then all the hierarchies of heaven exist within him. But in truth, there is neither macrocosm nor microcosm, but one existence. great and small, are such only as viewed by a limited consciousness. So the idea here is that human beings are a reflection of the whole cosmos. Human beings are like a microcosmos. So when we talk about angels that are in the different planes of the universe and elemental forces, every one of those hierarchies of beings, those manifestations of forces, those states of consciousness and matter, they are all reflected in a human being. This is an amazing idea because usually we see ourselves as a very limited being. But Blavatsky is saying a human being is a cosmos. The problem is that in most of us, the higher aspects of this microcosm are dormant or are in a state of germ. So what the spiritual path tries to do is to develop all these higher aspects which are dormant in each one of us. And eventually we can become a reflection, a full reflection of what the whole cosmos is. And finally, she says the fourth and last basic idea to be held is that expressed in the great Hermetic axiom. It really sums up and synthesizes all the others. As in the inner, so is the outer. As in the great, so is the small. As it is above, so it is below. There is but one life and law, and he that worketh, it is one. Nothing is inner, nothing is outer. Nothing is great, nothing is small. Nothing is high, nothing is low in the divine economy. So this is sometimes is called the law of correspondences. That since there is one being, then that being is reflected in every atom of the universe. So it is this idea of a holographic universe, where the part in some way contains the whole. Not in exactly the same way, but at its own level, it is a manifestation of the whole. So this is why it is said, as it is above, so it is below. As it is in the outer, so it is in the inner. And this is a guide, a very important guide for us when we have to study the secret doctrine. And we are going to use this law quite a bit, because when we are trying to apply the cosmic aspects of the teachings that we find in the secret doctrine to the psychological states that we experience, we are using these basic ideas. We are, which, as Blavatsky said, they come from one particular worldview, the view that there is only one being, therefore everything is alive, and that one being is reflected in every atom. Therefore, the human being is a cosmos, a microcosm in itself. So this gives us the clue or the way in which we can begin to use the metaphysical teachings that we find in the secret doctrine to be applied to our psychological states. So to sum